I found the ultrasound photo in the kitchen drawer, not where it should have been, not where anything important should ever be. It was tucked behind some old birthday cards and a pack of expired coupons, and that alone made my stomach turn, because who hides something like that? Who hides something that's supposed to be a moment of joy, of celebration, unless there's something you don't want found, unless there's something you don't want explained? I remember picking it up with 2 fingers, like it might burn me, the black and white print blurry but unmistakable, a tiny form curled like a comma, and at the bottom, in small clean letters, the due date, December 22nd. My throat went dry, the kind of dry that comes with panic, with the realization that something in your reality just cracked, and everything in your mind rushes in to fill the gap. Because in March, when she would have conceived, she was in Miami. With her best friend, Lila. And I wasn't. I was here, working double shifts, fixing the roof, trying to get the nursery ready even though she said we didn't need to rush, even though she said we had time, because she didn't even know she was pregnant yet. But she did know, I think she knew, or at least she had to suspect something, because she was quieter when she came back, quieter and more affectionate, like someone trying to make up for something they can't say out loud. She kissed me more often, she laughed at all my jokes, she touched my face like she hadn't seen me in years. I thought it was love. I thought maybe the trip made her miss me, made her realize what we had. I thought we were getting better, stronger, finally on the same page after all the years of trying, after the miscarriages, the failed IVF round, the arguments in the car where we screamed at each other over nothing but meant everything. But now I look back and it all feels like a setup, like she was cushioning the fall, preparing the ground for when the truth would hit me, when it would bury me, when it would choke me awake at night like it does now. I didn't confront her right away, I couldn't. I didn't know how to form the words, how to look her in the eye and say, this date doesn't make sense, this baby isn't mine, is it? Instead I walked around the house like a ghost, holding this secret like a grenade, afraid of pulling the pin, afraid of what would explode when I did. She noticed, of course she did, she's not stupid. She asked if something was wrong, she cupped my cheek in her hand and searched my face like it held answers she couldn't find in herself, and I lied. I said work was stressful, I said I was tired, I said everything except the truth, because I wasn't ready to hear hers. And yet the truth started leaking through the cracks anyway, in the way she avoided my eyes when we talked about names, in the way she hesitated every time I said, our baby, like the words scraped against her conscience. I started watching her more closely, not out of suspicion, but out of necessity. I needed something to hold on to, some thread that would pull me towards certainty, because I felt like I was losing my grip on what was real. And then came the baby shower. The baby shower was at her sister's place, a small 2-bedroom condo with too many pink streamers and balloon bouquets for such a tight space, but no one seemed to mind. They were all smiling, laughing, piling gifts onto the table like this child was already the center of the universe, and maybe she was, maybe that's how it's supposed to feel, but I couldn't shake the way my stomach twisted every time someone said, you two must be so excited, because I wasn't, not anymore. I was terrified. I stood in the corner by the kitchen island, nursing the same cup of lukewarm coffee for an hour, watching her move from guest to guest with that practiced grace she always had at parties, and I kept waiting for her to look at me, really look at me, like she used to, like I was still in the picture, but she didn't, not once. It was Lila who noticed me first, of all people, Lila with her perfect hair and her perfect laugh and her perfect Miami tan. She made her way over like she was floating and gave me this sideways hug, the kind people give you when they're not sure where you stand, and she said, you holding up okay, Dad-to-be? And I just nodded, because what the hell was I supposed to say? How was I supposed to answer that, when the words Dad-to-be sounded like a lie someone else had written into my script? Then she did something strange. She looked around the room like she wanted to make sure no one was listening, and leaned in a little closer, her voice lower now, softer, more serious, and she said, listen, I know this whole thing's been sudden, but she's really happy, you know, like glowing happy. It's been a long time since I've seen her like that. And I almost asked her right there. I almost said, Lila, what really happened in Miami? What did you two do? Who did she meet? But my mouth didn't coo. Parrot, and the words just stayed stuck behind my teeth like broken glass, cutting me from the inside out. Instead I nodded again, smiled like I believed her, and watched her walk away, watched her go hug my wife like everything was normal, like everything made sense, and I felt like I was the only person in the room who was stuck outside the truth. When it was time for the gift opening, I stood behind her chair, my hands resting on the back of it, and I remember thinking, this is the last time I'll ever be close to her without knowing for sure, this is the last time I'll pretend. She opened box after box, onesies, bottles, blankets with little ducks on them, and every time someone said, she looks just like you when you smile, I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip down the streamers and say, "Stop pretending, this isn't what it looks like, we're living inside a lie." But I didn't, because I'm a coward, or maybe because I still loved her, maybe because some part of me still hoped there was an explanation that didn't end with betrayal, that maybe the dates were wrong, maybe the doctor had made a mistake, maybe there was some scientific margin of error that could save me from this cliff I was standing on. That night, back home, I lay in bed beside her and stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, the tiny hitch it made when she rolled to her side, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't live in that silence. I had to say something, even if it ruined everything. So I said her name. Just her name. And she turned to me slowly, her eyes half closed with sleep, and I said, "When did you find out you were pregnant?" She blinked, then smiled a little, said, "Around mid-April." "Why?" And I said, "Because the due date's December 22nd, right?" And she hesitated, just long enough for me to notice, and said, "Yeah, around then." I sat up, hard hammering now, my voice shaking as I asked, "Were you already pregnant when you came back from Miami?" She didn't say anything for a long time, and that silence was worse than a scream. It was confirmation, it was the truth finally arriving without a disguise. She sat up too, slowly, carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something between us, and she said, "I don't know for sure, I really don't. I wasn't keeping track of dates, I didn't think it mattered." And I asked her, why wouldn't it matter? Why wouldn't the moment our child was conceived matter? And she whispered, "Because I didn't want to know the answer." That broke something in me, it did, it snapped something I'd been holding onto for months, because she didn't say no, she didn't say it's yours, she didn't look me in the eye and say, "Don't be ridiculous," she said she didn't want to know, and that's worse, that's a door left open for monsters to crawl through. I got out of bed and paced the hallway like a man looking for an exit, like someone trapped in a house he built with his own hands and now couldn't escape, and she followed me, barefoot and shaking, and she said my name over and over, like she could pull me back with just that, like it was enough. I turned to her, finally, and asked, "Did you sleep with someone in Miami?" She closed her eyes. And that was my answer. Not yes, not no, just the weight of her silence, pressing against my chest until I couldn't breathe. I asked her who, I asked her how many times, I asked her if it meant anything, and every answer she gave was worse than the one before, because it wasn't just a mistake, it wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a weekend, it was a choice, and she'd made it while I was here, building a life for us, patching holes in our roof so our child wouldn't be cold in the winter. She said it was a stranger, someone Lila knew, someone who made her feel wanted again, and I wanted to laugh, I really did, because I had spent years trying to make her feel wanted. I had sat with her through every doctor appointment, I had held her hand when they said we'd probably never have kids, and now here she was, glowing and pregnant and full of joy, and none of it belonged to me. She cried, of course she cried, she fell to her knees in the hallway and begged me to forgive her, said she hadn't meant for it to happen, that she loved me, that it didn't change anything. But it did, it changed everything. Because once you plant a lie that deep, it grows roots, it poisons everything around it, and I didn't know if I could ever look at her again without seeing the shape of another man's shadow. I slept on the couch that night, and the next after that. I didn't know what to do, I didn't know who to talk to, I couldn't tell my friends, I couldn't tell my parents, I couldn't even look in the mirror without feeling like a fool. The worst part was, I still loved her. And I hated that. Because love isn't supposed to feel like betrayal. But it did. And I wasn't ready for what came next. The baby shower was supposed to be a celebration. Blue and white balloons filled the living room, strung across the windows like garlands of hope. There was a table full of cupcakes with little plastic feet on top, and everyone kept hugging her, rubbing her belly, saying things like, "He's going to look just like his daddy," and, "You two are going to be such amazing parents." Every word landed like a stone in my stomach. I smiled. I posed for photos. I said, "Thank you," when someone handed us a gift card or a onesie. But the whole time, I felt like I was acting in a movie I didn't audition for. And the leading role wasn't mine, it was his. Whoever he was. I kept waiting for her to pull me aside. To tell me the truth. Maybe she'd confess it like a secret she could no longer bear, whisper it in the quiet moment between guests arriving and cake being cut. But the confession never came. She laughed like everything was normal. She looked me in the eyes like she didn't know she was breaking me from the inside out. It wasn't until Lila showed up that I felt something shift. She hadn't RSVP'd. In fact, we hadn't heard from her in months, not since Miami. But there she was, standing in the doorway with a gift bag and a frozen smile. They hugged tightly. Too tightly. The kind of hug you give someone when you're trying to erase guilt with affection. I noticed how my wife held on a second longer, how her fingers dug into Lila's back like she was anchoring herself. And Lila, she kept her eyes on me the whole time. Like she was trying to gauge if I knew. I watched them for the rest of the afternoon. Small glances, shared whispers, the way they leaned their heads together when looking at baby clothes like they were reliving something. And maybe they were. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the dishes were half done in the sink, I asked her if she'd had fun. She nodded. It was perfect. Really? I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of the ultrasound in my pocket. I'd started carrying it everywhere, like it might answer my questions if I held it long enough. You and Lila seemed close, I said. She paused, just long enough for it to mean something. She's my best friend. Yeah, I said, but I haven't seen her around much since the trip. She's been busy. Busy, I repeated, and the word felt sharp in my mouth. She didn't seem too busy to fly across the country for a baby shower. She turned to look at me then, and for a moment, there was something raw in her eyes, not fear, but maybe the cousin of it. What are you trying to say? I almost said it. I almost took the photo out and laid it on the counter like evidence in a trial. But I didn't. Because once you say something like that, once you ask is the baby mine, there's no going back. Instead, I said, nothing. Just, noticed, that's all. She came over and kissed me. You worry too much. Everything's fine. But it wasn't. And the next morning proved it. I found her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, humming some lullaby she'd picked up from a pregnancy app. I didn't mean to snoop. But that phone, it was a portal. And I stepped through. I didn't have to dig far. There were no deleted texts or hidden folders. Just one thread, pinned to the top. Lila. I scrolled up. Past memes. Past recipes. Past shared baby name suggestions. And then I hit March. March 16th. A message from Lila. He still thinks the baby's his. My breath caught. The screen blurred. I don't know how to tell him, my wife replied. And then, he's been so good to me. I didn't mean for this to happen. I scrolled further. More texts. Details. Apologies. Regrets. It was one night, she wrote. I thought it would mean nothing. But then I missed my period. Please don't hate me. Lila's replies were cold. Clipped. Guilty, maybe. But mostly scared. I locked the phone. Put it back exactly where I found it. Then walked outside like the air in the house had become poison. I drove nowhere for an hour. Just loops around the neighborhood, past the school we talked about, the park where we'd imagined family picnics, the hardware store where I bought paint samples for a nursery that might never be mine. When I came back, she was making tea. Her hair was wet, face flushed from the hot water. She looked happy. Hopeful. Like someone planning a future. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone at her feet and ask her why she would let me build a life around a lie. Why she would let me talk to her belly every night and imagine what our son's laugh would sound like. But I didn't. Because a part of me still loved her. And another part, a darker part, wanted to see how far she'd go. So I played along. I rubbed her back. I made dinner. I read aloud from the parenting book on the coffee table. And when she fell asleep next to me that night, I just stared at the ceiling and counted lies like sheep. The next week was a test. For both of us. I asked more questions. I brought up Miami casually, pretending I was thinking of planning a vacation. She told the same story she'd told before. Sunburns, mojitos, lazy beach mornings. I watched her closely. 4 cracks. For anything. But it wasn't until I ran into Lila at the grocery store that everything started to unravel. She was standing in the baby aisle, holding a pack of diapers she clearly didn't need. When she saw me, she froze. I gave her a smile. Shopping for someone. Ah, yeah. My cousin's having a baby. I stepped closer. Funny. My wife's due in December. She looked down. I continued. She tells me it was just a quiet girl's trip. But I get the feeling you two had a lot more going on. Look, I don't, she began, but I cut her off. I'm not asking you to tell me what happened. I already know. I just want to know why. Lila's lips trembled. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. That's what she said too. I told her to tell you. I begged her. Well, I said, picking up a box of wipes and tossing it into my cart, she didn't. Then I turned and walked away. That night, I looked at her while she slept. Her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her lips parted slightly. And I knew. I couldn't keep pretending. Tomorrow, I would ask the question that would tear everything open. Tomorrow, I would finally pull the pin. The next morning, I waited until she was halfway through her bowl of oatmeal before I said it, my voice barely louder than a breath, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Is the baby mine? The spoon froze in her hand, suspended in midair like gravity had just stopped working, and for a second I thought maybe she hadn't heard me, or maybe she was about to lie again, maybe she'd shake her head and laugh and pretend I was being paranoid, but then her eyes met mine, and something cracked. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She just stared. And in that silence I already knew the answer. I knew it before she dropped the spoon back into the bowl, before she pushed her chair back slowly, before she stood and walked away without a word, hands trembling as she clutched the sides of her robe like it could hold her together. I didn't follow her, I couldn't. I sat there listening to the sound of her bare feet moving across the floor, then up the stairs, then nothing. Minutes passed, or maybe an hour, I don't know. Time felt useless, like a concept made for people whose lives weren't unraveling. I finally stood up and walked to the living room, where the baby books were still stacked on the coffee table, the ones I had bookmarked, highlighted, the ones I had read every night like I was studying for a test that might save our family, and I picked one up and hurled it across the room, not out of rage, but out of helplessness. It hit the wall and fell with a soft thud, and that sound somehow hurt more than anything she could have said. I heard the creak of the stairs behind me, and when I turned around, she was there, holding a piece of paper in her hand, her face pale and her eyes swollen, like she'd already cried through the explanation before she even gave it to me. She handed me the paper. It was a letter, written in her handwriting, dated a week after she got back from Miami. I didn't plan for this, it began. I didn't even know it happened until I took the test, and by then I was too scared to say anything, because I wanted this to be ours so badly. I wanted this baby to be a miracle, not a mistake. I read the words slowly, each sentence like a nail in the coffin of the life I thought we had. She wrote about how they'd had too much to drink, how it was just one night, how she thought it didn't mean anything, how she felt sick the next morning, how she cried in the hotel bathroom while Lila begged her not to overthink it, not to ruin everything over something that could be forgotten. But she didn't forget. She carried it with her. Inside her. Every day. And I carried her, supported her, made plans, painted walls, smiled through my exhaustion, dreamed of being a father, while she lied to my face, over and over again. I folded the letter and placed it on the coffee table, then looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the woman I married. I saw someone I didn't know, someone I wasn't sure I could ever trust again. You should have told me, I said, my voice shaking in spite of everything I'd rehearsed in my head. You should have given me the truth, no matter how hard it was. I was going to, she whispered, tears running down her cheeks now. I tried, I wanted to. I thought maybe we could pretend, maybe it wouldn't matter if we just loved the baby together. Pretend. I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it, just disbelief. You were going to build a life with me on a lie and hope I never noticed. Hope he never noticed. She sat down on the couch, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore, and she held her stomach protectively, instinctively, and it broke me, because I saw the fear in her eyes, the guilt, the love, all of it crashing together in a storm she couldn't escape from. I didn't cheat on you because I stopped loving you, she said. I cheated because I felt broken, because after everything we'd been through, the miscarriages, the coldness, the silence, I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore, like I had nothing left to give, and I made a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. And now there's a life growing from that mistake, I said quietly, and you want me to raise him like nothing happened. She didn't answer, because there was no good answer, not for that. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that fills a room so completely it starts to feel like a third person in the conversation, the kind that settles in your bones and makes you question everything, even the good memories. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually she said, "I don't expect you to forgive me, I don't even expect you to stay. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, not even once." Love. It's such a cruel word sometimes. Because I believed her, I believed that she loved me, and maybe she still does, but love isn't enough when it's built on lies. Love doesn't erase betrayal, it doesn't fix the fracture that happens when someone you trust more than anyone else in the world looks you in the eyes and hides the one thing that could shatter you. I got up and walked to the door, not to leave forever, just to breathe, to get away from the smell of oatmeal and tears, from the echo of the word pretend still ringing in my ears. "Where are you going?" she asked, barely audible. "I don't know," I said, hand on the doorknob, "but I can't be in this house right now, not like this." I stepped outside into the cold morning air, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe, but every breath still hurt. I walked for hours, through neighborhoods I didn't recognize, past couples pushing strollers, past kids riding bikes, past the kind of life I thought we were building. And I kept thinking about the baby. About the innocent little soul that didn't ask for any of this, that didn't choose to be the product of a mistake, that would one day ask questions I didn't know how to answer. And I realized something then. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about what kind of man I wanted to be now that I knew the truth. And I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew I had to find it soon. Because December 22nd was coming. And with it, a life that deserved more than silence, more than shame, more than a man stuck in the wreckage of his heartbreak. He deserved a father. The question was, could I be one? I didn't come home that night. Instead, I slept in my car, parked behind the old diner on 12th and Maple. The heater ran low, my legs cramped in the front seat, but the cold didn't bother me. Not as much as the thought of her lying in our bed, alone, hugging a belly that carried another man's child. It's not that I didn't care. That was the cruel part. I cared too much. I stared at the ceiling of the car until the sky turned gray, then blue, then gold. I watched the sunrise like it could tell me what to do. Like maybe, if I looked long enough, the light would break something open inside me, something brave, something forgiving. But it didn't. By 7 a.m., I was still the same broken man who left her standing in the living room with her hands on her stomach and tears running down her face. When I finally drove back home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't expect breakfast, or a smile, or even a word. But I didn't expect to see her sitting on the bottom step of the staircase either, suitcase beside her, coat on, hair still damp from the shower. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice low, unsure if I was ready for her answer. She didn't stand. She didn't flinch. "I'm staying with Lila for a while," she said, looking up at me, her eyes dull like a photograph left out in the sun. "You need space." "I get that. I'm giving it to you." I nodded, but my chest tightened. I should have felt relieved. But I didn't. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted softly. "For you. For the baby. I made a choice, and now I have to live with it. I won't force you to pretend anymore." She stood slowly, her movements careful, and for the first time I saw how far along she really was. The roundness beneath her coat. The way her hand naturally settled on it, like a reflex. Like instinct. "You don't have to disappear," I said. "I'm not," she whispered. "I'm just stepping back. Until you know if you want me around at all." And then she walked out. I didn't stop her. The door closed quietly behind her, and once again the silence filled everything. Only this time, I welcomed it. Needed it. I walked into the nursery. It still smelled like paint. The crib was built. The little mobile with stars and clouds hung above it, still spinning slowly from the draft of her exit. I sat down on the edge of the rocker, the one I spent 3 nights assembling wrong before finally getting it right. I stared at the crib and thought about all the nights I imagined holding my son there. Teaching him to ride a bike. His first soccer game. Sunday morning pancakes. All of it. Now it all felt distant. Foreign. Not gone, just different. Because the truth is, the baby didn't do anything wrong. And that was the part that kept tearing me in half. He didn't choose this. She did. She made a terrible mistake. But him. He was innocent. A life that still had no idea about pain or betrayal or lies. I thought about my own father. How he left when I was 9. How he never called again. How every time I asked Mom about him, she'd just say, he wasn't ready to be a man. And how, eventually, I stopped asking. Was I about to become that man? Was I going to disappear because it was easier than facing something uncomfortable? Or worse, was I going to stay but hold resentment like a weapon, let it bleed into every moment, poison the boy with my bitterness? Neither version felt right. Neither version felt like who I wanted to be. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my mom. She answered on the second ring. "Will," she said, surprised. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. Then I told her everything. Not just the affair. Not just the baby. I told her about the hope. The miscarriages. The night she cried herself to sleep in the bathroom. The way I stopped seeing her as my partner and started seeing her as a project I needed to fix. I told her the truth, about me, about her, about all of it. And when I finished, the line was silent. Until Mom finally said, "Do you still love her?" I closed my eyes. Yes. But I don't trust her. She didn't tell me what to do. She didn't say stay or leave. She just said something I'd never forget. Sometimes, love is about showing up, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. But trust. Trust is earned, baby. Brick by brick. If she's willing to build it back, and you're willing to let her, then maybe, just maybe, that child doesn't have to grow up watching two broken people hating each other. After the call, I sat with her words. Brick by brick. I looked down at the crib. At the rocker. At the books still stacked in the corner. And for the first time since she handed me that letter, I didn't feel only pain. I felt choice. My choice. Later that night, I texted her. We need to talk. Not about the past. About the future. She responded quickly. Name the time and place. We met at the park near her sister's apartment. It was cold. She wore the same gray coat, her hair tucked into a beanie. She looked smaller somehow. Like part of her had gone missing. But when she saw me, she smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough. I took a breath. I don't know what we are right now, I began. But I know what I want to be. I want to be there for the baby. That doesn't mean I've forgiven you. That doesn't mean everything's fine. But I'm not walking away. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't expect anything from you, she said. I know. But I expect something from me. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the version of her I fell in love with. The woman who fought for her family. The woman who made mistakes but didn't hide from them. I'm going to be in that delivery room, I said. I'm going to hold him. Feed him. Rock him to sleep. But I'm also going to need space. Time. Honesty. You'll have all of it, she said. We didn't hug. We didn't kiss. But we sat on that bench until the sun went down. Talking about baby names. About who we used to be. About who we might still become. And for the first time since the world fell apart, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man making a choice. 2 weeks later, the call came. It was just after midnight, and I'd finally dozed off on the couch with the TV still murmuring in the background. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Lila. I sat up fast, heart pounding. She's in labor, Lila said before I could say anything. Contractions 5 minutes apart. We're heading to St. Mary's now. I grabbed my keys and was out the door in less than a minute. I didn't even bother to change out of my hoodie and sweatpants. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights, empty streets, and my own breathing echoing in the car. Was I ready for this? Of course not. But I was coming anyway. When I reached the maternity floor, Lila met me in the hallway. She looked exhausted but calm. She's asking for you, she said quietly. My feet moved on their own. The moment I stepped into the room, I froze. There she was, Reese. Pale, sweaty, gripping the bed rails with a strength I didn't know she had. Her hair clung to her forehead. Her eyes were shut tight, jaw clenched through a contraction. When she opened them, they found mine. And despite everything, despite the pain and chaos and fear, she smiled. You made it, she whispered. I walked to her side and took her hand. Of course I did. She didn't say anything else. She just held onto me like I was the only steady thing in the world. And maybe, in that moment, I was. The nurses moved quickly. The doctor arrived 15 minutes later. It was all happening so fast. I'd imagined this moment differently. I thought we'd be laughing between contractions. Me pacing like a cliché, her yelling at me to shut up. But this wasn't that. This was quiet. Focused. Raw. At 3:27 a.m., our son was born. They placed him on her chest, and for a second, the world stopped spinning. He was perfect. Pink, squirmy, wailing, but perfect. I stared at him, heart swelling, throat tight. My son. Not biologically. But mine. Reese cried silently, stroking his head, whispering something I couldn't hear. And then, gently, she looked at me. Do you want to hold him? I hesitated. But she nodded, lifting the bundle toward me. I took him. And the moment he settled into my arms, something inside me cracked wide open. He stopped crying. His tiny hand curled around my finger. And I didn't care who his father was. I was his dad. I knew it right then. I sat in the rocking chair by the window, holding him against my chest. Reese watched from the bed, tired but glowing. What are we calling him? I asked, softly. She smiled weakly. I was thinking. Mason. Unless you hate it. Mason, I repeated. Mason Evans. She looked down. I didn't give him his real father's last name. I didn't even tell him I was pregnant. I blinked. You didn't. She shook her head. He ghosted me before I could. Honestly, I think he was just a mistake I made when I was grieving us. He's not the kind of man who would have shown up. I let her words sink in. Not because I wanted to judge her, but because it explained so much. She wasn't hiding the pregnancy because she was waiting on him, she was just scared. Lost. Alone. We didn't talk much more that night. She slept. I held Mason for hours, memorizing the weight of him, the tiny rise and fall of his chest, the way his lips puckered like he was dreaming something deep. Around sunrise, a nurse came in and asked if I wanted to fill out the birth certificate. I looked at Reese. She nodded. My hand shook a little as I wrote William Evans in the space for father. It didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a promise. The days after Mason's birth were a blur. Diaper changes. Feedings. Sleepless nights. We stayed at Reese's sister's place for a while, neutral ground. Lila had set up a small nursery in the guest room. It wasn't perfect, but it was warm and safe. And slowly, we began to fall into a rhythm. I'd show up at 8 every morning with coffee and breakfast. She'd hand me Mason, groggy but grateful. We didn't talk about the affair. We didn't talk about us. Not yet. One afternoon, maybe a week in, I was changing Mason's diaper when I noticed Reese watching me from the doorway. You're really good with him, she said softly. I'm just learning as I go. She smiled. Me too. There was a long pause. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Do you think we'll ever be okay again? I didn't look up. I folded the diaper, tossed it, zipped up Mason's onesie. I took my time. Then I said, I think, we have to redefine what okay even means. She didn't respond. Just nodded, tears shining in her eyes. That night, I went home and stood in our empty nursery. The one I painted. The one I thought I'd never use. And I made a decision. A few days later, I invited her over. When she arrived, she looked nervous. Holding Mason in his car seat, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. She stood in the doorway like a guest, like someone unsure if she was allowed back into her own life. "Come in," I said. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first, the subtle scent of baby lotion and fresh linen. She followed me down the hall to the nursery. And when she saw it, her hand flew to her mouth. It was perfect. The walls painted sky blue, the stars on the ceiling still glowing. The crib, the rocker, the mobile. Everything was ready. She turned to me, eyes wide. "You kept it all?" I nodded. It was never about whether or not I wanted to be a dad. I just didn't know if I could do it, after everything. She stepped closer. "You've already proven you can." I took Mason from her and laid him gently in the crib. He stirred a little, then settled, tiny breaths soft and steady. Reese looked at me. "What now?" I met her gaze. "I don't have all the answers," I said. "But I do know this: Mason deserves a home. A real one. And you deserve peace. If that means co-parenting from a distance, we'll do it. If that means trying again, slowly, we'll do that too. But no matter what, I'm not going anywhere." Her shoulders shook. She reached for my hand. "I want us to try," she whispered. "Not for the baby. For us." I didn't say anything. I just squeezed her hand. And for the first time in what felt like forever, we stood there not as enemies or exes or broken people trying to survive, but as two people, trying to rebuild something worth saving. Brick by brick. Together. 3 months later, our lives looked nothing like they had before. We'd found a new rhythm, a kind of quiet peace that came from surviving the storm together. The anger that once sat between us like a wall had softened. It hadn't disappeared completely, but it no longer dictated every word, every glance. We were still figuring it out. Still learning how to speak the same language again. But there was love. Not the fiery, reckless kind we'd had when we first fell for each other. No, this love was slower. Quieter. Stronger. And it was real. Mason had grown into a squishy, smiling little ball of energy. He had Reese's eyes and a crooked little grin that, somehow, reminded me of myself. I fed him every morning before work and rocked him to sleep every night I was home. He was the first thing I thought about when I woke up and the last thing I saw before I closed my eyes. He didn't care about our history. He didn't care that we'd fallen apart. All he knew was that we were there. Both of us. Always. And for now, that was enough. One Friday evening, I came home to the smell of something burning. Not in a dangerous way, just in a Reese tried to cook again way. I found her in the kitchen, fanning the smoke detector with a towel, laughing through her frustration. Mason sat in his high chair, giggling like it was the best show he'd ever seen. "Okay," she said, coughing dramatically, "note to self, broiling chicken is not the same as baking it." I laughed, crossing the room and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You tried. That's generous." I took over, tossing the ruined tray and starting a backup dinner of grilled cheese and tomato soup. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me with that look she sometimes gave now, the one that wasn't quite the way she used to look at me, but wasn't far off. "You've changed," she said softly. I glanced at her. "So have you." She nodded. "Do you ever think, maybe that needed to happen? All of it. The breakup, the pain, the distance. Maybe we had to break to figure out how to really love each other." I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I had thought about it. A lot. "I don't think we needed to break," I finally said. "But I think we needed to grow. And sometimes, yeah, pain does that." She stepped closer, her hand brushing my arm. "I love who you are now, Will. I just wish it didn't take so much to get here." I turned off the stove, wiped my hands, and looked her in the eye. "I never stopped loving you," I said. "Even when I hated what you did. Even when I thought I'd never forgive you." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm so sorry. For everything." I pulled her into my arms, holding her close. "I'm not promising it'll be easy," I said. "But I'm here. If you are." "I am," she whispered into my chest. "I am." We started therapy a week later. Not because we were broken, but because we wanted to stay whole. We talked about trust, about trauma, about rebuilding something better from the pieces. Some sessions were hard. Some ended in silence. Others ended in tears. But through it all, we stayed. We showed up. And slowly, the foundation we were building began to feel strong again. Not perfect, but solid. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror, tying a blue silk tie around my neck. Mason babbled in his crib nearby, dressed in a tiny navy suit that made him look like a baby banker. Reese came into the room in a soft ivory dress, her hair curled, her eyes shining. "You look beautiful," I said. She smiled. "So do you." We weren't doing anything big. Just a small vow renewal ceremony in our backyard, with close friends and family. A fresh start. A second chance. We talked about a courthouse wedding. About waiting. But in the end, we decided to celebrate what we'd fought for. Reese stepped closer, adjusting my tie. "You nervous?" I laughed. "No. I think I got all the nerves out the first time." She smirked. "Same." Outside, everything was simple and soft. Mason sat with Lila in the front row, chewing on the corner of a program. The officiant smiled as we stood beneath a wooden arch draped in white flowers. When it was time for vows, we didn't read from cards. We just spoke from the heart. "I don't stand here pretending the past didn't happen," I said. "But I do stand here promising that it won't define our future. You hurt me, Reese. But you also gave me the greatest gift of my life. And every day since Mason was born, I've seen a version of you I never stopped believing in. I love you. And I'm ready to keep choosing you. Every day." She wiped her eyes. Then she took a breath and said, "I broke something sacred. And for a long time, I thought I didn't deserve your forgiveness. But you gave it anyway. You didn't just come back, you rebuilt me. You reminded me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about staying when it's hard. And I will stay, Will. For you. For Mason. For us." We exchanged rings again. Sealed it with a kiss. And just like that, we were husband and wife, again. But this time, we were different people. Stronger. Wiser. Whole. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Mason was asleep, we sat out on the back porch wrapped in a blanket. The stars above us were quiet. Still. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't, if things had gone differently?" "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But not tonight." "Why not tonight?" "Because tonight, we're exactly where we're supposed to be." She turned to me, her eyes warm and full. "I'm proud of us." "Me too." We sat there for a long time, wrapped in silence and stars and a love that had been tested, broken, and reforged in fire. This wasn't the life I thought I'd have. But it was better. Not because it was flawless. But because it was earned. And as Mason stirred in his crib, dreaming his innocent baby dreams, and Reese's hand found mine in the dark, I finally understood something. Some stories don't have happy endings. They have earned ones. And this was ours.